International co-productions and Hollywood influence have brought many benefits to Australian cinema. They provide larger budgets, boost the local economy, and increase global exposure for local films. However, our small domestic market often pushes filmmakers to rely heavily on international partnerships, in particular Hollywood and the US. Our population does not support the local industry, so Australian films are dependent on overseas markets. With this increased reliance on Hollywood and other international studios, do we risk diluting the stories that make Australian cinema so distinct? This essay explores how international collaboration and Hollywood has influenced Australian national cinema through 3 films: Australia, Crocodile Dundee, and Mad Max Fury Road, and asks whether global success must come at the cost of modifying or diminishing Australian stories and their authenticity. Australian cinema became well known during the 70s and early 80s with the rise of Ozploitation. Movies at this time were low budget, gratuitous, and held themes of rebellion, outback survival, and anti-authoritarianism. A new wave of Australian films helped establish our national cinema identity and gave voice to our socio-cultural identity, addressing issues of race, ethnicity, gender, masculinity, sex, national origin, and religious beliefs, or lack thereof. Walkabout, Wake in Fright, Mad Max, and Beresford's Break and Morant include a blend of genres like horror, apocalyptic thrillers, biker films, crime, and mateship. Tom O'Regan describes Australian national cinema as distinctive, suggesting that it shows an Australianness of character and themes, while also depicting how it differs from others, adopting foreign dynamics and making them feel familiar, local, all while not shying away from the ordinariness or even ugliness of Australian life and making it relatable. Both Crocodile Dundee and Mad Max Fury Road were able to reach worldwide success without compromising on their Australianness, even though both in different ways were heavily influenced by Hollywood. Crocodile Dundee, although fully funded by Australian investors, needed US markets to distribute the film to reach audiences in the US and overseas. Originally rejected by 20th Century Fox, executives stated that it was hard to understand, it wouldn't resonate with US audiences, and that it was too strange. There was some idiot who sat with his feet on the desk and watched it for about 20 minutes, looked at his watch about 8 times and told me that it wouldn't work. Despite the criticism and rejections, Cornell and Hogan didn't alter the film's narrative and finally found backing from Paramount Pictures. The movie became extremely successful and captured audiences around the world who embraced the cultural authenticity of Mick Dundee's story. Leaning into stereotypes, themes of race, cultural clashes, and romantic love in a non-threatening way, Crocodile Dundee built a sense of connection between Australians and Americans. Mick was like a modern-day Clint Eastwood character, only less violent and very confidently, unapologetically Australian. The film constructs and deconstructs an idea of Australian masculinity. Mick Dundee is all things to all people: self-made man, tough guy, bush philosopher, romantic lead, old-fashioned knight, defender of women, tamer of wild animals, and wandering free spirit. Vince Canby, chief critic of the National New York Times, declared, "As I understand it, the Australians would have us believe that Australia is the only place left on earth where one might still be able to find the kind of character once popularly identified as American." Although it has been criticised for its exaggerated stereotypes celebrating bar fights, drinking, homophobia, stretching of truth, and sexism, its Australian socio-cultural essence, good, bad, and ugly, helped it become the most successful Australian movie of all time, grossing over $300 million. Baz Luhrmann set out to achieve similar success to Crocodile Dundee with his movie Australia. Produced with 20th Century Fox and a budget of $130 million, Australia promised to be a classic neo-Western Australian epic with blockbuster appeal, touching on historical events like World War II, the Stolen Generation, and the Outback. During the opening title to Australia, it notes the impending bombing of Darwin and gives a romanticised depiction of life on the land, and a final note on the Stolen Generation. It was also a place where Aboriginal children of mixed race were taken by force from their families and trained for service in white society. These children became known as the Stolen Generations. This commentary sets the tone for the movie with the expectation that this will be a historical drama carrying emotional weight that will tackle serious issues like racism and government policy. However, the film's inconsistent tone, racism to slapstick to tragedy, stylized hyperbolic narrative, and sweeping outback cinematography glosses over the racism, social injustice, and gender inequality. Sarah, Nicole Kidman's character, who recently finds herself a widow, has an unrealistic level of privilege and freedom for a 1930s woman of the outback, consequently failing to evoke genuine empathy or emotional investment. Even Nulla, an Indigenous half-caste, suffers the loss of his Indigenous mother, is beaten by his biological white father, stuck between cultures, and is constantly at risk of being taken away by government policy. Yet despite all this, it's hard to feel empathy for him. His story never feels entirely real. When he later saves a herd of cattle with his magic song, it reminds us that this is just a fictional story, which trivialises the very real and painful issues that the non-diegesis opening title promised to explore. Lerman tries to offer a redemptive twist, a romanticised history, but instead he sanitises and simplifies the harsh realities of colonisation. As mentioned earlier, Tom O'Regan refers to the projection of Australian ugliness and ordinariness as a key element of defining national Australian cinema, such as the uncomfortable truths of national identity. Lerman avoids this ugliness of Australian colonial history and instead provides a Hollywoodized story offering cinematic fantasy deprived of our rich, diverse and enigmatic Australian identity, prompting the question whether a film can authentically represent national identity while appealing to a global market. Thankfully, one international co-production that still feels distinctly Australian in tone, style and anti-authoritarian in spirit is Mad Max Fury Road. Similar to Crocodile Dundee, Fury Road connects with Australian and American audiences with its recurring themes and genres of Australian cinema like the outback gothic, mateship, battlers, masculinity and madness. George Miller, having directed the prequels, was clear on the Australian elements of New Wave that made the previous movies so successful. Car culture, the land as an antagonist, the fast, loud action and madness of it all was interwoven into themes of rebellion and survival. Mad Max Fury Road shows how strong creative vision and cultural confidence can preserve national identity, even within international co-production. So while international co-productions have strengthened the economic viability of Australian cinema and broadened its global reach, they have also impacted on narrative, tone, direction and voice that defines Australian national cinema. Crocodile Dundee's partnering with Paramount led to extraordinary success. However, later sequels targeted solely at US audiences diluted this stereotypical Australian image. Lerman's Australia, which held so much promise, compromised on its narrative with the removal of the ugly Australianness of our colonial history. Fury Road, however, with its mostly international cast and shot in Namibia, shows how effective Australian cinema themes and sensibilities are in drawing global appeal despite its international partnerships. The film didn't try to appeal to everyone and instead stayed true to its themes and essence regardless of how shocking or ugly. In conclusion, despite co-productions and Hollywood influence, the challenge for Australian filmmakers is to focus on telling honest, locally grounded stories with vision and confidence, while leaning into Australian national cinema sensibilities to make it globally resonant